does pick up everything, and that's just like a quick heads up. Um, do, 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 do. Mm. Okay. Your debate is now being live. All right, you all are good.
Very cool.
All right, best of luck.
Is everybody good for case? Cool. We affirm resolve the U.S. should remove nearly all of its military presence in the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. Our first contention is terrorism. In combating radicalization, U.S. military actions abroad seem to have imperiled rather than improved the country's security. As Lang 19 explains, virtually all radical Islamic terrorists since 2001 have described their attacks as acts of revenge for U.S. military actions in the Middle East. As Bowman 12 quantifies, when the U.S. occupies a country with a larger proportion of Islamic radicals, terrorists are 20 times more likely to come from that country. Thus, he concludes, U.S. military presence is strongly correlated with the recruitment and motivation of al-Qaeda's most radicalized members. The statistical effect is staggering, as Gopner 16 finds for every 1,000 American troops sent to fight the war on terror, the number of terror attacks worldwide increased by 19. Beyond that, the model finds up to 80% of worldwide terror attacks since 9/11 can be explained by the war on terror. Fortunately, as Bowman 12 writes, a dramatic reduction in the number of permanently based U.S. troops in the Middle East would significantly reduce the radicalization of future generations. Fast action is critical, as Yusuf 18 finds once extremists establish a presence, they reinforce the dynamics that led to their initial emergence. Once extremists have established a foothold in one community, they can more easily spread to neighboring communities, regions, and countries. Our second contention is the Saudi Arabian alliance. As Shep 18 finds, over the past few decades, the US has often found itself projecting our own power by defending the hegemony of our problematic allies in the Middle East. Problematically, as Vaughn 20 writes, the Saudi government funds and arms radical groups throughout the Middle East. Vast sums of money flow from Saudi Arabia to al-Qaeda and ISIS, which is why, as Vaughn concludes, Saudi fingerprints are on a staggering number of terrorist attacks the world over. This is not an accident. As Butt 15 explains, Saudi Arabia has spent more than $100 billion on exporting fanatical Wahhabism to poorer Muslim nations worldwide over the past 3 decades. And as Lang finds, Wahhabism cites the Quran's description of war against unbelievers in the first centuries of Islam to justify unceasing war against less observant Muslims and non-Muslim unbelievers. This war is the jihad. As Buck continues, this appears to be a monumental campaign to bulldoze the more moderate strains of Islam and replace them with the theo-fascist Saudi variety. The US is complicit in this campaign, as Vilcek 18 writes, the West handpicked this ultra-Orthodox and radical wing sect as an ally in destroying almost all the progressive, anti-imperialist aspirations in countries with a Muslim majority. The impact is catastrophic, as Borer finds Washington actively encouraged such activities by partnering with Saudi Wahhabists in Afghanistan, Bosnia, Kosovo, Chechnya, Libya, and Syria. Most recently, as Hannah 18 explains, in the run-up to Indonesia's national elections, reports detailed the troubling expansion of Saudi-backed radical Islam in the world's most populous Muslim-majority country, which is degrading long-standing national traditions of pluralism and tolerance. Unfortunately, resistance to Saudi Wahhabism leads to conflict. As Pew Research finds, over 50,000 people have died in the conflicts around Wahhabist laws in Nigeria, and one finds similar situations in Indonesia and all other countries where the system has been established. But as Pew continues, the greatest danger of these laws is to democratic principles and systems themselves. When you intertwine religion and the state in such a close fashion, all criticisms of the state become religious criticisms. Under Wahhabism, someone who criticizes a state policy or state laws can be hit with the charge that they are in fact opposing Islam. They then face the death penalty. This has happened in Nigeria, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Afghanistan. Critics of government policies are put to death for challenging Islam. Fortunately, withdrawing U.S. forces solves. When the U.S. is present in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia will always feel comfortable exporting Wahhabism for 2 reasons. First, they have the financial security to do so. As Shep 18 concludes, money is fungible, and every dollar the U.S. spends on defense for the coalition is a dollar Saudi Arabia saves to spend on bribing or recruiting jihadists. Second, they have the support of a large military power committed to protecting their interests, so they feel that they are unlikely to be challenged. As Beauchamp 16 writes, U.S. deployment was about signaling a broader U.S. commitment to Saudi security and defending the Middle East status quo. And as Benam 19 finds, U.S. military bases across the Gulf encourage the region's leaders to act in ways they otherwise might not, safe in the knowledge that the United States is invested in the stability of their regimes. Thus we affirm. I'm going to go grab my water bottle before cross quickly. Sorry.
Right.
Okay, are you good for cross?
Yeah. Can I have the first question? Yeah. All right. Seeing how Saudi Arabia already gives like arms sales to the, or U.S. already gives arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and they wouldn't stop in either world, wouldn't they still be back in this like Wahhabist state?
No, because
How?
the specific link that we tell you is that U.S. bases prevent Saudi Arabia, A, from getting attacked, and B, in turn,
Yeah.
defend
But
Saudi Arabia for them.
so when Saudi Arabia gets weapons from the U.S., they're also getting prevented from being attacked because they have a military to back up against those attacks.
No, not
right?
necessarily, because Saudi Arabia is buying those weapons, so they're spending money on them. It's a different link. When the
So
US
if they buy the weapons, don't they still have the things to
is
protect them?
specifically spending money on defending the coalition, like building bases and like fighting their battles for them, basically. Saudi Arabia saves money and spends it on Wahhabism. It's pretty clear. Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
So you say with this CFR card, just to clarify, that the U.S. needs our defense capabilities in order to like pressure Iran in negotiations. What negotiations?
Like to get negotiations to solve the conflict, to come to a peace agreement, we need to have Iran, or the U.S. needs to have a credible defense posture.
Like the nuclear
Okay.
that fell through?
No, not the nuclear agreement necessarily, but negotiations that will lead to peace in the area. Because right now, like if it's just the negotiations term is more specific. It's that if we have no U.S. there, then Iran sees no one to deter them away from going out and invading other countries.
Every negotiation we've gone into with Iran, even with U.S. military presence.
Yeah, but we would say comparatively, right? Like the status quo is comparatively better because we're not having Iran going around and invading other countries, for example, because the U.S. is there and it's deterring them from expanding
there's
more and
no
more.
specific negotiations that you're talking about that the U.S. has helped with.
I mean, I can't see the future and tell you which negotiations are going to happen, but like.
Then what is the card basing it off of? Are they basing it off of the negotiations?
Okay, so the card is saying for negotiations in the future, the only way that those negotiations will ever happen is if the U.S. is there and has a credible defense posture, because it deters them from expanding. No. Can I have a question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what happened when the U.S. pulled out of Iran or Iraq in 2011?
I'm sure you can tell me.
So it created a huge power vacuum, and that's how ISIS came to power. So how can you tell me that leaving the U.S. in a country is going to actually breed terrorism when they left the country, it literally created a ginormous terrorist group?
When we pulled out of Iraq, the only place that we pulled out of was Iraq. When we're pulling out of the Middle East generally, it creates a much smaller target on the U.S.'s back because we're no longer there.
Also in Syria, like when we're pulling troops out, it gives like a space for terrorist groups to thrive. That's our argument.
The only place that we pulled out of was Syria. When we're pulling out of the entire Persian Gulf,
and Iraq.
But can I ask you a question?
Wait. Can I have a follow-up question on that?
Sure.
If we pull out of all of the Persian Gulf, isn't the power vacuum for terrorists to fill in even greater? So we might have a bigger terrorist group than ISIS?
The incentive. There's a difference between pulling out of Iraq and creating a stabilizing situation there that terrorists take advantage of.
Okay, cool. You can have a question.
So is Iran afraid of the number of the troops the U.S. has, or are they afraid of the U.S.?
I mean, I would say that they're afraid that the U.S. can retaliate against them, which only happens when troops are in the region.
Okay, so they're not afraid of the quantity, they're afraid of the country behind them.
No, they're afraid of the retaliation, which comes by having troops in the region.
Behind the troops, if they attack the troops.
All right, crosses over.
We'll take some prep.
Yeah. Oh, we're taking prep, by the way. That was 55.
All right, we're good. Okay.
Sorry, how long was that?
55 seconds.
55 seconds. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to respond to their case. Is anyone not ready? As an overall response, the status quo is actually trending towards peace right now. Hussein 18 of Bloomberg writes that a combination of financial and military pressure would impose a new decision in calculus in Iran, no matter how aggressive their hardliners are. Because Iran is weak and unable to expand its regional power in the status quo, Okin 19 of Politico furthers that Iran is attempting to gain leverage in future negotiations because they cannot expand their hegemony. For this reason, Tasihi 19 of the New York Times writes that Iranian hardliners are now looking towards direct negotiations with the US. Taki 20 of the CFR reports that talks could materialize after the US presidential elections when Iran knows who they're going to be negotiating with. However, affirming ends any prospects for long-term peace because Kirwani explains in 2019 that the US must be in the region as a major power to enforce a regional security agreement. Otherwise, any diplomacy between Gulf states and Iran will inevitably collapse. Specifically on their first contention, they talk about how US presence is bad because it increases terrorism through recruitment. But the problem with their studies is that they're all a victim to selection bias. This is where the United States typically intervenes only in the worst conflicts when the conflicts are escalating. Any increase in conflict or terrorism after the US intervenes is not because of US military presence, but rather that was just the natural trajectory of the conflict. When they say that 1,000 troops increase caused an increase of 19 attacks, they don't directly give the causality that that's because of US troops. And moreover, they don't give you the comparative analysis that removing these troops would cause those attacks to completely go away. That's why we would argue that at the point where the CFR reports that if we pulled out of the Middle East, these terrorists would see it as a victory and they could use that for recruitment as well. But overall, we would say that affirming is going to be much worse because comparatively, that would cause a terrorist resurgence. Aliyah 20 foreign policy reports that in the status quo, ISIS has lost all of its territory and all of its remaining fighters have been forced underground. Thus, the Wilson Center reports that ISIS deaths have declined by 66%. Affirming and removing our military presence would lead to an ISIS resurgence, as Conville 20 of the LA Times writes that the US military presence in Iraq is what allows the US-led coalition to conduct operations in Iraq and Syria that have severely weakened ISIS. This is crucial because Aliyah 20 asserts that continuing our counterterrorism operations are essential to preventing its resurgence. And ISIS resurgence would be disastrous because the Pew Research Center reports that ISIS has killed tens of thousands of people and displaced over 10 million people in Iraq and Syria. This has been empirically proven through two examples of the US leaving. First, Schmidt 19 of the New York Times reports that after the US left Syria, ISIS has been expanding in Syria and even creating resurgency cells in their new territory. Second, Connor 20 of Newsweek finds that because of coronavirus, the US has moved troops away from places in Iraq where coronavirus has spread. Consequently, McGid of Foreign Policy writes just a week ago that ISIS is now planning on resurging in the places that the US has left due to coronavirus, ultimately showing that US counterterrorism operations are effective and leaving the region only increases terrorism to a greater degree than their recruitment evidence says. Then on their second argument about the Saudi Arabian alliance, what they tell you is that Saudi Arabia is exporting its ideology and the US is somehow backing this. But their argument is really vague because they never tell you that affirming and removing our military presence now is going to be enough to stop Saudi Arabia from exporting its ideology. In fact, what US really does for Saudi Arabia is sell its weapons. And at the point where we're only removing our military presence when we affirm, we're still continuing to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia so they can still export their ideology, for example, in Yemen. Moreover, what we would argue is that at the point where, for example, their first warrant is about how US gives them financial security, they just give you this random analytic that says the US gives them money, but that's just not true at all. The US sells weapons that Saudi Arabia has to pay for, and if the US didn't sell them weapons, then other countries like Russia would. Then second, their second warrant is essentially how Saudi Arabia or how the US backing them in the Middle East through military presence signals a commitment, but this is really vague because they don't tell you what this commitment means and to what extent that increases Wahhabism. They say that 50,000 people died from Wahhabism, but this isn't a result of US influence allowing Saudi Arabia to export Wahhabism. It's just a holistic number that isn't really influenced by the US. And unless you know to what degree the US influences this, you shouldn't vote on this argument. So please negate.
Okay, I'm gonna take a little bit of prep. Let me just pull my timer up. Okay, everyone good? Starting now. Okay, that's a minute 25 run. All right, I am going to start on our case. Is everyone good? Okay. Starting off on the top of our case, we're going to accede to the D-link, which means that they're not going to gain any access to like the offense that they gain off of the turn. But then even if you still do want to buy the turn, I would say that these examples aren't good because they're just like showing US military presence leading one country. Whereas when we leave the entire region, we would say that takes away the incentive for attacks overall, insofar as our like cards show you that the incentive for attacking is anti-US sentiment. That is why our Bowman card from case tells you that a dramatic reduction in the permanently based troops in the Middle East is good solvency for terrorism in the long term. But then on Wahhabism, they give you a couple responses. First, they tell you it's vague and they like don't know how much is enough. I would tell you it's pretty clear. Shep tells you that money is fungible. So every dollar we're spending on Saudi Arabia's military is a dollar they spend on bribing jihadists. On this, they just say that we're selling Saudi Arabia weapons, but that has nothing to do with what we're arguing about. We're arguing about our troops and like bases in Saudi Arabia physically that are giving money to prop up their military that they would otherwise be spending domestically on defense. They're not though, because we're subsidizing it and they're using that money to prop up jihadism in other countries. Then they say the 50,000 deaths card is not directly a result of Wahhabism or because of U.S. presence. I would say what happens when U.S. gives money to Saudi Arabia is that Saudi Arabia uses that money to prop up the Wahhabi party, which then infiltrates the government from within the country. When the Wahhabi party gains power, more laws are passed, and it's like a different, very theocratic strain of Islam. That leads to conflicts. That is why the 50,000 people die. It is directly because of U.S. influence that allows Saudi Arabia to do this. Then, on our second link about commitment, they just say that commitment doesn't mean anything, but they miss our Benaim card that says specifically that U.S. spaces embolden actors to act in ways they otherwise wouldn't because they know that a very strong actor is behind them, supporting their every move. That is why Saudi Arabia is able to export in the status quo. Now, onto their case. First, on the Strait of Hormuz, we have had sanctions on Iran for literally decades, at the point where they say that sanctions are the reason this is happening. They concede that it's not unique, it happens in either world. But then I call for their link evidence. Their Bowder card literally has nothing to do with US military presence. It says that Iran is scaling back in the status quo, but doesn't say it's doing that because of us. Insofar as that is true, it is functionally non-unique. But then I would say Iran is also hurt by a closure of the Strait of Hormuz because it tanks global oil prices. Iran is also part of the global economy. Make them provide for you a reason they would ever do that. Then on their impacts. First, on war, there's absolutely no contextualization. You cannot vote up it. Then on oil, we're going to outweigh here. Even if oil prices go down and poverty goes up marginally, it's going to be much worse to give extremists a permanent foothold in the region. Now, on Iran, there's going to be a couple of really big turns here. First, Parsi tells you that when Trump opted not to go to war and pull troops out of the region, it wasn't chaos that ensued. Instead, it was regional diplomacy among Iran and Saudi Arabia. We have the best link into diplomacy, which is their link into their solvency. But then Zenko 18 tells you that Iran has taken advantage of the chaos and instability caused by US-led wars. That's really important because they say that a power vacuum comes, and that is uniquely why Iran is emboldened. We say we are creating the power vacuum. That's why Iran is emboldened right now, and it gets better in our world. Hubel provides for you the solvency with saying that the misguided US strategy has opened the door for more Iranian influence, and it is time to end this perverse cycle. The only way to do that is for the US to withdraw its military forces. Hubel says that word for word. Then they say that negotiations are the way that they have solvency here. I would say insofar as we've had military presence in the region and negotiations that have never happened, there's no reason to buy this. But then remember, Iran isn't scared of the number of troops. They're scared of the country behind them. Attacking just one US troop left in the region, which we provide for with the nearly all part of the resolution, is enough for Iran to still be scared of us. Quickly on their impacts, their first is not contextualized at all. You cannot vote for it. But then on their second economic impact, it's all from the 90s. It's really bad evidence. Are we good for
we're gonna take some prep.
Okay.
All right, that was like 20 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, can I get the first question?
Sure.
Okay, so you said in response to our case that Iran and Saudi Arabia had regional diplomacy. When was that?
In September
Of last year?
of this year. Or yeah, of last year, technically, in 2019.
So didn't the US recently increase its troop presence though? By 1,000 troops in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, but that was after the instance of diplomacy.
Okay, so then doesn't that mean like we can still have talks despite the fact that the US has increased its military presence?
Sure, but it also means that we have the cleaner link into them insofar as the diplomacy
Yeah, but you didn't
happened.
explain to me why these regional diplomacy, like the regional
Yeah,
diplomacy
so-
occurred in the status quo when the US still has like 60,000 troops in the Persian
Sure.
Gulf.
So the warrant behind the Parsi card is really clear that when Saudi Arabia didn't feel that it had the security guarantee anymore, it had to turn to diplomacy as a like means of self-preservation, which also applies to the second link at the bottom of our
Okay,
case,
so even
which
if I
says that
agree that
Saudi
Saudi
Arabia is, like,
Arabia is more
emboldened.
likely to have diplomacy in a world where the US doesn't support them militarily,
Yes.
why would Iran want to have diplomacy if the US isn't there and they can just expand for free?
Sure. So that's our second term that we read you is Zenko, saying that Iran is taking advantage of the chaos and instability caused by the US-led wars right now, which means they no longer have these like bad situations to exploit when we leave the region, which means that they also
Okay,
then
so-
need to turn to diplomacy as a
So
means of
why don't we look at
self-preservation.
Iran's incentives? Why does Iran want to expand? Isn't it
Uh,
regardless of US presence?
Sure. Yes.
Okay,
But
so
I'm
if Iran,
saying
so if
the
you agree that Iran,
circumstances-
wait,
I'm-
you just made a big concession. If you said that Iran wants to expand regardless of US presence, that means when you affirm the resolution, Iran is going to increase its support in areas like Syria and Lebanon, where they're already supporting these
No.
troops.
You took the word yes out of my mouth and invented a whole thing.
You agreed
The
that Iran
concession
wants to
that
expand no matter what.
sure, Iran wants to expand, but the responses I make are not about their incentive. They are all about their ability, which is why the Zenko card is extremely
Okay.
explicit in saying that Iran's only able to do this because of the chaos we've created. But can I take a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So let's go to the response at the bottom of my case. You guys tell
Yeah.
me that since other actors can like sell Saudi Arabia weapons, it's like not fungible. But if so like the link the chat card tells you is that money is fungible. So a dollar that they're saving is a dollar they like can spend on bribing. So if they're
Okay,
buying
so-
the weapons, how is it
So
still
even if I
fungible?
agree with that, like how many dollars was spent to like increase Wahhabism? Like, so if I spend $100 to help Saudi Arabia expand, how much Wahhabism will that increase?
$100.
No, like that's not like a clear answer to my question. Like, for example, you tell me that they
I can't
expanded
tell
into
you how-
Indonesia,
I
right?
can't tell you the
So-
percent of Wahhabism that goes up with each dollar.
Exactly. That's why
There's
I'm
no
telling you
answer to
your
that question.
argument is extremely vague and the judge shouldn't evaluate it.
Okay,
because
that's not a real
it's-
response though.
No, it is a real response. We give you clear impacts in our case, where we tell you that a Middle
Sure, but
Eastern
if you
war
don't
kills
have
on
a link
average
into this-
160,000 people, but like your impacts just say that the US would be supporting Wahhabism and that looks
Yes.
bad.
No, that's
Also,
not
that's
the
like
impact
way
at all.
over time.
Okay, sure.
Okay, we're gonna take a little bit more prep. Okay, we use 135, so we have 20 seconds left. Okay. So I'm gonna start on their terrorism turn, or our terrorism turn against their case. Is everyone ready? The cleanest piece of offense in this argument, or in this round, which they never respond to, is the turn that Calvin reads you in his rebuttal. It's from Aliyah, which explains that in the status quo, due to military presence by the U.S., ISIS has lost control of all of their territory. But Aliyah furthers that if we maintain counterterrorism efforts, maintaining the counterterrorism efforts is necessary to preventing a terrorist resurgence, which means that when you affirm and take away these U.S. troops, there's going to be a terrorist resurgence because ISIS no longer has anyone going against them, and they can just freely take back all of their territory. Look to our empirical evidence from Schmidt, which tells you that after the US left Syria, ISIS expanded again. The only way to keep these terrorists hiding away in their splinter cells is to negate and have US troops still there. They don't make any responses to this. They just say that they don't want to respond to it, so they try to kick out of their own argument. Don't let them do that, as this is still a clean turn against their case. But next on our case, first on our overview, we tell you that the status quo is already going to peace from the Hussein evidence, which explains that US military pressure is creating a new decision calculus in Iran. We tell you from Kermani that if we ever want to have hope of a regional peace agreement, the US needs to be there to enforce it, because otherwise Iran will just constantly try to expand no matter what. The only thing stopping them is US military presence in the status quo. Moreover, Okun explains that Iran is solely trying to gather leverage now for negotiations because they realize that they can no longer win in the region, which means that when you affirm and allow them to get a chance to win in the region, they're not going to want to negotiate. Rather, they're going to see a clear victory and they're going to go for it. But next on our contention 2 on regional stability. We tell you from Tabar that in the past 40 years, tensions with Iran only decreased when rulers maintained power in their nation, but they were contained regionally, which can only happen when the U.S. is there, because Takei explains that the U.S. needs a credible defense posture to pressure Iran to negotiate. They make one main response, and it's that when Trump called or led the U.S. out of Iran, or Iran it led to diplomacy, one main thing, Trump has never pulled out of Iran. Last year, he actually recommitted 1,000 more troops. If anything, that shows you that the status quo is solving back right now because we're having negotiations when we're sending troops. But the next response that they make is that negotiations are never happening and they have never happened in the past. But we would tell you that even if negotiations haven't happened yet, the status quo is trending towards solvency at the part where we read the Khan card, which explains that Iran has decreased military spending by 28% in 2020 because they realize they can no longer win and they no longer want to focus on military assets. And also, Iran is waiting to negotiate till after the presidential elections. That's another card that Calvin reads you in his rebuttal. But then extend the impacts, which is starting a conflict. Because Valles explains that the Middle East is a really critical area because there are 7 major flashpoints where war could occur. And Lutz explains that each war could kill 160,000 people on average. At the point where we are the only team that reads numerical impacts, that's already an easy way to vote for us. You know that there's a big risk of having all these conflicts happen in the affirmative world when you pull out U.S. military. Lastly, on the Wahhabism thing, there's a lot of unanswered questions. They can't tell you why Saudi Arabia would export their ideology without the U.S., how much has the U.S. even added to Wahhabism, and how much money even goes to Wahhabism. Wahhabism has existed long before the U.S. and will exist long after they leave. There's no reason why you can buy this argument because they give you no link or uniqueness into why it only affects the negative world. For these reasons, we negate.
Okay, we'll run a little prep. Okay, is everybody ready? It's going to be our side of the flow and then theirs. I'm going to start on Wahhabism. Sorry, let me just pull up the timer. Actually, I'm going to start on the top of our case. Is everyone good? Okay, quickly on the top on this turn. First, what you have to remember is that we kicked out of it and you literally cannot evaluate it in this round and look at the PF rules. But then Catherine actually does respond to it in some sort of way by telling you that we take away the incentive for these terrorist groups to exist. We are always going to have better solvency. But then the clearest place that you're voting for us in the round is our contention on Wahhabism. First, as Butt tells you, Saudi has spent over $100 billion exporting Wahhabism to poorer Muslim nations. And as Vilcek tells you, they've had the US has supported this. This is problematic as Pew tells you that over 50,000 people die wherever Wahhabism makes it to because of conflicts surrounding the harsh laws that Wahhabist parties prop up in different countries. Fortunately, a US pullout solves in two ways. First is money. Shep tells you money is fungible. Every dollar that the US spends building bases, sending in troops to fight battles for Saudi Arabia is a dollar that they don't have to spend. They then take that money and use it to export Wahhabism. But then is the security blanket. The only reason that Saudi Arabia feels comfortable doing so many like diplomatic exercises and like forcing Wahhabism down the throats of all these poor Muslim nations is because they have the US's security blanket behind them, so they feel like they won't be challenged in this. This relationship cannot be replicated with anybody. When the US is gone, that completely disappears. They feel unsafe, they stop exporting. The only response that they reach you on this is that they're basically confused about what we're telling you. I think we've made it very clear. Saudi Arabia goes into other countries, they prop up Wahhabist parties, those parties get people put to death, cause civil insurgents, which in turn kills people. They tell you it existed before the US, it'll exist after. First of all, it didn't exist pre the US because it didn't get exported because Saudi Arabia did it in the US supported them and it means to counter the Soviets. It's a completely US-led problem. But then on their case, they drop a few key responses here. First, on the diplomacy turn quickly, we tell you diplomacy happened when we threatened to pull out earlier this year. Maybe we didn't pull out, but the mere threat of pulling out was enough to encourage diplomacy. A real pullout will have the exact same effect. But then they drop both Zango and Kugel. First, Zango tells you that the US creates power vacuums, which is why Iran has been able to advance at all. And then Kugel tells you that the only way to solve this issue is if the US pulls out of the region. The AF has very clear solvency coming from this card. But then the most important thing that they drop is the nearly all response. In the resolution, we are not taking away every single troop in the region. We are leaving strategic troops. This means and we tell you throughout the entire round that these countries, that Iran is not afraid of the quantity of troops that we have, but they're instead afraid of the country behind them. So even if we leave like a relatively minuscule amount of troops, they're still going to be too afraid of a US strike in order to attack. They leave this conceded throughout the entire round. You can sign your ballot right there. But then you're always going to prioritize stopping the spread of Wahhabism on both terrorism and on their impacts because the Middle East operates under a framework of sectarian conflict. Even if you buy that negating eases tensions with Iran and with ISIS in the short term, you are always going to see another conflict arise unless you heal the sectarian divide that only happens when radicalization is decreased because Saudi Arabia stops exporting Wahhabism to these poor countries, inciting them into violence. Thus we affirm.
All right, you guys ready for Grand Cross? Got the first question.
Sure.
So would you say that Saudi Arabia?
Sorry, one of you guys is echoing, so I couldn't hear that.
It's just a yes or no question. Do you mind answering it?
I'm not going to answer.
Hold on, the judge is waving.
Can we just reset for a second? Can everyone speak? Because I got like lots of feedback and no sound. So just go around and say hello or something so I can hear.
Hello.
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 Okay, Sophia, I can't hear you.
Oh, can you not?
I don't hear you.
Oh.
Can you turn your sound off and on again? Maybe that'll help.
Did that work?
Yes, there you are. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
All right. So would you say that Saudi Arabia is pretty committed to Wahhabism?
I'm not going to answer the question because it's not our impact and it would lead to a new response.
I mean, your entire contention is about how Saudi Arabia is spreading Wahhabism, right? So why are you not going to answer the question?
About how the U.S. physically enables Saudi Arabia to export it. It doesn't.
Yeah, so you tell me that Saudi Arabia is electing a lot of Wahhabist officials, for example, into their government. So wouldn't you say that their government is pretty committed to Wahhabism?
The impact is not domestic.
That clearly, yes.
No, it's not the impact. I'm just talking about your argument.
Our argument is not at all about Saudi Arabia's commitment to Wahhabism. It does not matter how.
Yeah, but that's our argument. What we said in our speech is that Saudi Arabia would do this regardless. And you don't prove to what extent the U.S. increases it.
We literally tell you that it is 100% the responsibility of the U.S. that Wahhabism has made it as far as it does. Because they're the reason that Saudi
So
Arabia.
let's talk about that. So sure, like Wahhabism might have been created after the U.S. was in Saudi Arabia, but we're not arguing that the U.S. never should have gone into Saudi Arabia. Our argument is that now they should not leave, which means that after Wahhabism has already been created, say that it's better for the U.S. to be there.
Continues to make it to more and more countries is because the U.S. is subsidizing
Okay.
Saudi Arabia's ability to do
So
it.
a quick question about that. How much does it cost for a Saudi Arabian official?
I'm sorry, you've asked like 4 questions. Do you mind if I take one?
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Okay. So let's talk really quickly about your case. So you, like, the main link into Iranian, like your Iranian impact is that they're like using this power vacuum. But insofar as you concede the Zenko turn, that the U.S. is creating the power vacuum, how do you have solvency?
Yeah, the U.S.
Because you
creates a
don't give a
power
warrant
vacuum when
on
they
that at all.
leave.
No.
A power
Zenko
vacuum
turn-
can't be created
Our
unless
Zenko
power
turn-
leaves the area.
Okay, no, this is new. Our Zenko turn, which we read you in rebuttal and summary, and you guys concede.
All
is
you
that the
said is
US
that there's
in
a
the
power
region-
vacuum, but you don't say
No.
like how that
I
power
read you
vacuum,
Okay.
word for
where
I
the
read-
power vacuum
okay.
is.
That's false.
So,
I read you
definitionally,
word for
what
word
is a
that
power
Iran is
vacuum?
taking advantage of chaos and instability caused by U.S.-led wars.
Okay,
Meaning that
definitionally, what is a power vacuum? It's when there's a lot of power after a big power leaves, right?
No, that's not what the Zenko card is talking about. The Zenko
No,
card.
I'm just
word
asking
for
you, what's a
word
power
says
vacuum?
Iran has taken advantage of the chaos and instability caused by U.S.-led wars. A power vacuum is an absence of power. It has nothing to do
Yeah,
with
so if
Yeah,
the U.S.
so
leaves
the absence
region,
of
there's
power-
an absence of power.
There's
Yeah.
power
That's
vacuum.
our argument. You
Okay.
never explained to me how the U.S. can create a power vacuum when it's in the region.
All right,
Yes,
can I ask
I do.
another
By
question?
causing chaos and instability by waging war. But
Can I
But
ask
that's
a
not a
question?
power vacuum. The
Sure,
U.S. is
go
in the
ahead.
region as the major
Okay.
power.
So how much does it cost for a Saudi Arabian official to like go to Indonesia, for example, and say like spread Wahhabism? Like how much does that
It
cost?
tells you that
And it doesn't matter the answer. We tell you
100
How does it
billion
not
dollars.
matter the answer of how much it costs if you're telling me that the U.S.
First of
giving
all,
money to Saudi Arabia is that
if
important?
you let me answer the question, I could tell you exactly why it doesn't matter.
Okay, go ahead.
Because no matter how much it costs, the only reason that it's able to happen is because the U.S. is subsidizing the entire cost, no matter what that number is.
Okay, so hypothetically, if it costs $1, would Saudi Arabia not do it if the U.S. wasn't
It
backing
doesn't
them?
cost $1.
Yeah, I'm saying hypothetically.
But
Like,
tells you
because
that
you guys
there's
can't tell me how much it
$100
costs to do
billion
that simple thing.
Yes,
That if
but
it's $1, then that $1 is only coming from the U.S. But anyway,
So
can I-
Saudi Arabia wouldn't spend it regardless of how much Wahhabism plays a
we're
part
telling
in
you
their
that right
government.
now they can only fund Wahhabism because of the money that they're getting from the U.S. Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
Can I
sure.
ask
Do
a
you want a
question?
question?
Are we out of time?
Yeah, I think so. But you can have one more if you want.
No, it's
No, it's fine.
Cool. All right, we'll take the remaining 20 seconds.
All right, we're good. Okay, it's gonna start on our opponent's case. The arguments about war with Iran and this Wahhabism argument are incredibly muddled, but the one that they never respond to is our argument on an ISIS resurgence. What they just say is that they kicked out of the argument, but that's not how debate works. What we tell you is that if you affirm the resolution, then ISIS will resurge because the US leaves the region and there's no one to conduct counterterrorism operations against them. The only reason why they say they can kick out of this argument is because I also said that anti-American sentiment is not the sole reason for terrorist recruitment. Both of those things can be true at the same time, which is why we would say that our terrorism argument is extremely important at the point where we do our Pew Research evidence, which says that ISIS has displaced millions of people from their homes and have killed millions or tens of thousands of people as well, and they're causing massive instability. And our Aliyah evidence says that they would resurge, and they have already resurged in areas where the U.S. has withdrew, like in Syria. So if we withdrew across the entire Persian Gulf, they're more likely to resurge to a greater degree, which would be much worse, and tens of thousands more people would die. Then let's go to their arguments on Wahhabism. There are just so many unanswered questions that they cannot explain to you, so I wouldn't be comfortable on voting on this argument. What they just say is that tons of people have died from Wahhabism, but they don't prove that these people wouldn't have died if the U.S. left the Persian Gulf, because it's fundamentally, they don't tell you how much it would increase in the future if the U.S. didn't leave. They also don't tell you what is the commitment of Saudi Arabia to Wahhabism, or how much it costs to hire diplomats and fly them across the ocean to spread this ideology. But at the end of the day, we would say that preventing war with Iran is going to be a much clearer argument. Their only response to our argument agreement is saying that the U.S. is creating power vacuums in the status quo, but it's definitionally not a power vacuum. There's only a power vacuum when a major power leaves the region and someone else fills it in. That fill-in actor would be Iran because it would be free to extend. In fact, our Tabar evidence says that right now is a unique place for peace, because in the past 40 years, tensions have only decreased when rulers maintained power regionally, but they were contained. And our Hussein evidence says that there's a new decision calculus in Iran. Our Kirwani evidence says that the U.S. is needed to enforce a regional security agreement for the long term, or it's going to fail. If we don't have an agreement, there's 7 major flashpoints in the Middle East where conflict could occur. And Mahoney says that removing U.S. troops would double the chance of war, and each Middle Eastern war kills 160,000 people on average. That's a much more clear impact than their Wahhabism argument, where they can't quantify. They can't tell you much about how much the U.S. affects it. So I wouldn't vote for that. Please negate.
Okay, is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me pull up my timer. Okay, I'm going to start on my first contention. Starting on the top of my first contention, they're trying to gain access to offense off this turn. First of all, I accede to the D-Link in first rebuttal. They literally cannot get offense off of this turn. But second, they drop the response that Sophie and I are making throughout the round, which is that even if you buy that an ISIS resurgence might happen, we take away the incentive for this terrorism in the first place because we're not in the region anymore, and they concede that the root cause of terrorism is anti-US sentiment, which means when we take away the incentive for terrorism, there is no terrorism, they don't gain access to offense off this turn. But then, on our case, on Wahhabism, they give you these like 3 brand new questions in final focus. First of all, they say that these people wouldn't have died. They really miss the crux of our case, which is that even if Saudi Arabia really wants to export Wahhabism, it literally cannot do so without the US. This is for 2 reasons. First comes from Shep, who tells you that every dollar that the United States spends on military and defense for Saudi Arabia, they spend on supporting and bribing Wahhabists. That's really important because it gives us a unique link into this Wahhabism spreading. But second, the security guarantee, Ben Aim tells you that US bases uniquely embolden actors to act in ways that they otherwise wouldn't because they are safe in knowing that the US, a great military power, is at their side and behind them. So all of these questions about what would have happened in a world without the US are pretty clear. Wahhabism would not have been exported insofar as even if Saudi Arabia wants to, they literally only have the ability to in our world. On their case, they drop 2 really big responses that are going to lose them the round. First, Zenko tells you that the US is creating chaos that Iran is taking advantage of, and this chaos comes from US-led wars. They try to beat this by saying that, like, semantically, it's not a power vacuum. Don't let them win the round on semantics. If Iran is like benefiting off of the chaos that we are creating right now, that's a unique reason to vote for us insofar as we link in better to their war with Iran. If you need any more proof of this, Hoovel tells you that the best way to end this perverse cycle is for the US to withdraw its military forces. We can send you that card. They also drop our weighing, which says that even if you buy that we get into a war with Iran right now, sectarian conflict is the best link into long-term stability in the Middle East, because if you don't stop exporting Wahhabism now, there will be sectarian conflict after sectarian conflict for the rest of the future of the Middle East. So please affirm.
Good round, guys.
Good round.
Good round.
Good round.
Oh, you're muted, by the way.
Sorry. Okay, sorry, muted. I'm gonna just jump over to the ballot and I will be back in a few minutes. Thank you. Great round. Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was a great debate. It was really, really close. It's really hard to make a decision when everybody's as good as you guys are. I ultimately decided for the neg. And it was just, I think, because of a strategic choice that AF made. And this is just stepping back for a second and talking about debate in general. I think the obsessive need to get to an impact or a quantifiable impact, depending on what you're arguing, can really weaken your argument. And I think it was really hard to establish logically that, I mean, you even used the word at one point that the money is fungible, meaning it can be used for many different things. I realize you used it to mean different something else, but that's not what fungible means. And you know, it's you set yourself up to have to prove that if the U.S. pulled out, the dollars would stop going to wahhabism. Okay, and I think that was difficult to establish. I think had you instead of argued it more in the gray area and been more comfortable focusing on the fact that these are really bad actors and our presence is emboldening them, and not hanging your hat so much on having to show that there was this dollar for dollar situation going on with this one piece of evidence, you would have had a much stronger argument. But I totally understand why, because you have a lot of judges who don't want to hear about anything gray and they have to have an absolute impact. It makes it much more difficult to do that. So it's just, for me, the analysis and the, you know, that's where the argument was. And you guys sort of gave that up to focus so much on the 50K and the dollar for impact. And I just didn't see it. I also, I did give them some offense on the turn with ISIS. I know you wanted me to delink it and all that, fine, but I don't think you really responded. You could have talked about the fact that it was this small detail. You know, there were some things, you know, they didn't have a lot of offense, but because you were on the AF, you had the bigger burden. So that was where, and again, the focus so much being on the dollar for dollar impact, I just didn't see it being that difference in the status quo from what it would change with the resolution.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Okay.
so much.
Okay, thanks. Good luck.